took up the ministry in Samaria. Peter and John were later sent there, resulting in further expansion of Christianity. Acts 8. 1-17, 25. 9. 31. 15. 3. Samaritan o textoi acute miritra longo. Psalm 848. Jeroboam's efforts at alienating the 10 tribes from Jehovah's worship is centered in Jerusalem. For about 250 years after the nation had split into 2 kingdoms, the God-ordained Levitical priests were replaced by a man-appointed priesthood, which, in turn, led the kingdom of Israel in the practice of demoralizing idolatry. 1 Chi 12. 28-33. 2 Chi 17. 7-17. 2 Ch 11. 13-15. 13. 8, 9. Then came the fall of the northern kingdom. The pagan immigrants brought in from Babylon, Cuthah, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim were worshippers of many deities. Succoth-Benoth, Nergal, Ashima, Nabaz, Rutak, Adramelech, and Anamelech. Although they learned something about Jehovah through instruction by a priest of the Jeroboam priesthood, yet, as Samaria had done with the golden calves, they continued to worship their false gods, generation after generation. 2 Chi 17. 24-41. Josiah's extensive efforts to rid these northern communities of their idol worship, nearly 100 years after Samaria fell, had no more lasting effect than similar reforms made by him in the southern kingdom of Judah. 2 Chi 23. 4-20. 2 Ch 34. 6, 7. In 537 BCE, a remnant of the 12 tribes returned from Babylonian exile prepared to rebuild Jehovah's temple in Jerusalem. As 1. 3. 2. 1, 70. It was then that the Samaritans, who were already in the land when the Israelites arrived and who were described as adversaries of Judah and Benjamin, approached Zerubbabel and the older men, saying, "Let us build along with you. For, just like you, we search for your God, and to him we are sacrificing since the days of Esarhaddon the king of Assyria, who brought us up here." As for 1, 2. This claim of devotion to Jehovah, however, proved to be only lip service, for when Zerubbabel declined their offer, the Samaritans did everything they could to prevent the building of the temple. After all their concerted efforts at harassment and intimidation had failed, they then made false accusations in a letter to the Persian emperor and succeeded in getting a government decree issued that put a stop to the construction for a number of years. As for 3-24. In the middle of the 5th century BCE, when Nehemiah began repairing Jerusalem's walls, Sanballat, governor of Samaria, according to one of the Elephantine papyri, made several strenuous but unsuccessful efforts to stop the project. Ne 2. 19, 20. 4. 1-12. 6. 1-15. Later, after an extended absence, Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem to find that the grandson of high priest Eliashib had married Sanballat's daughter. Immediately, Nehemiah chased him away. Ne 13. 6, 7, 28. The erection of the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim, perhaps in the 4th century BCE in competition to the one in Jerusalem, is considered by some to mark the final separation of the Jews and Samaritans, although some think the severance in relations came more than a century later. When Jesus began his ministry, the breach between the two had not been healed, although the Gerizim temple had been destroyed about a century and a half earlier. Job 4. 9. The Samaritans were still worshipping on Mount Gerizim. Job 4. 20-23. And the Jews had little respect for them. Job 8. 48. This existing scornful attitude permitted Jesus to make a strong point in his illustration of the neighborly Samaritan. Luke 10. 29-37. Samaritan Pentateuch. From early times, the scriptures of the Samaritans have consisted of only the first 5 books of the Bible, and these only in their own recension, written in their own characters, and known as the Samaritan Pentateuch. The rest of the Hebrew scriptures, with the possible exception of the book of Joshua, they rejected. The Samaritan Pentateuch differs from the Masoretic text in some 6,000 instances, most of which are minor. However, some are major, as, for example, the reading of Deuteronomy 27. 4, where Gerizim is substituted for Ebal, the place where the laws of Moses were to be inscribed o textoi acute miritra longo. Samson 849 Samla. The fifth named king of Edom, who reigned before a king ruled Israel. Samla was from Masreka. GE 36. 31-37. 1 ch 1. 47, 48. Samos Samos Height. An island in the Aegean Sea near the W coast of Asia Minor. Paul apparently stopped briefly at Samos on the return from his third missionary tour. Act 20. 15. A strait about 1.5 kilometers 1 mi long separates this mountainous island from the Asian promontory named Samsondagi. Samos was of Ephesus and NW of Miletus. It is about 43 kilometers 27 mi in length and 23 kilometers 14 mi in width. At the time of Paul's missionary journeys, it was a free state. Its major city and port was also named Samos. The island was celebrated for the cult of Hera Juno, the Roman goddess of marriage and childbirth, and had a temple to her that vied in splendor and celebrity with the temple of Artemis at Ephesus. According to the scriptural account, the ship Paul was on when returning to Jerusalem stopped opposite Chios, sailed some 105 kilometers 65 mi down the coast of Asia Minor and touched at Samos, and on the following day arrived at Miletus. Act 20. 15. Certain manuscripts add an expression that leads to the rendering we touched at Samos and, after stopping at Trogyllium, made Miletus the next day. JB. This has been understood to mean that the ship did not remain in port at Samos but, instead, crossed the strait and anchored in the protection of the high promontory. However, the oldest and most reliable manuscripts omit the expression about Trogyllium, and it was rejected by Westcott and Dort as well as Nessel and Alland in preparing their master texts. The ship Paul was on evidently docked briefly at Samos and then travelled on to Miletus. Samothrace Samo Middle. Thrace possibly, Samos of Thrace. A mountainous island located in the Aegean Sea, having a city of the same name on its inside. Likely in the spring of 50 CE during Paul's second missionary journey, the ship on which he was travelling came with a straight run to the island of Samothrace from Troas in NW Asia Minor. There is, however, no indication that he went ashore. Act 16. 11. The modern-day island Samothrace lacks a good harbour, though it offers a number of places for safe anchorage. Samson from a root meaning son. One of Israel's outstanding judges. Son of Manoah, Bedonite from Zorah. Prior to Samson's birth, an angel appeared to his mother and announced that she would bear a son who was to be a Nazirite from birth and take the lead in saving Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. JG 13. 1-5, 24. 16. 17. As future leader in the fight against the Philistines, Samson would have to come near the dead bodies of persons slain in battle. Therefore, the very nature of his commission showed that he did not come under the law prescribing that Nazirites not touch dead bodies. New 6. 2-9. It should also be noted that this law applied to persons who voluntarily took a vow of Naziriteship. But in Samson's case, the requirements that applied were those specifically stated to his mother by Jehovah's angel. When old enough to marry, Samson requested that his parents get a certain Philistine woman from Timnah for him as a wife. It was in harmony with the direction of God's Spirit, as it was to provide occasion for Samson to fight against the Philistines. JG 13. 25. 14. 4. Subsequently, near Timnah, a manned young lion confronted Samson. Empowered by God's Spirit, he tore the animal in two with his bare hands. He then continued on his way to Timnah and there spoke with the Philistine woman whom he wanted as a wife. JG 14. 5-7. Sometime later Samson, accompanied by his parents, went to Timnah to bring his betrothed home. On the way there he turned aside from the road to look at the corpse of the lion that he had killed earlier and found a swarm of bees and honey inside. Samson ate some of the honey and, upon rejoining his parents, offered honey o textoi acute miritra longo. Samuel 850 him, and the ropes that were upon his arms came to be like linen threads that have been scorched with fire, so that his fetters melted off his hands. Taking the moist jawbone of a male ass, Samson struck down 1,000 men, after which he ascribed this victory to Jehovah. On that occasion Jehovah, in answer to Samson's request, miraculously provided water to relieve his thirst. JG 15. 9-19. Another time Samson went to the home of a prostitute in the Philistine city of Gaza. Hearing of this, the Philistines laid in wait for him, intending to kill him in the morning. But at midnight Samson got up and ripped the city gate and its side posts and bar from the wall of Gaza, and he carried them up to the top of the mountain that is in front of Hebron. JG 16. 1-3. See Gaza number 1. It was a great humiliation for the Philistines, as it left Gaza weak and unprotected from intruders. The fact that Samson was able to accomplish this amazing feat indicates that he still had God's spirit. This would argue against his having gone to the house of the prostitute for immoral purposes. In Lang's Commentary on the Holy Scriptures JG 16. 1, p. 212, commentator Paulus Castle says on this point: Samson did not come to Gaza for the purpose of visiting a harlot. For it is said that he went thither, and saw there a prostitute. But when he wished to remain there at Gaza overnight, there was nothing for him, the national enemy, but to abide with the prostitute. His stay is spoken of in language not different from that employed with reference to the abode of the spies in the house of Rahab. The words, "he saw her," only indicate that when he saw a woman of her class, he knew where he could find shelter for the night. Translated and edited by P. Schaff, 1976. It should also be noted that the account reads Samson kept lying till midnight, and not Samson kept lying with her till midnight. By going into enemy territory, Samson demonstrated his fearlessness. It may well be that he went to Gaza to look for an opportunity against the Philistines, as has been the case earlier when he sought the wife among them. JG 14. For if so, Samson apparently intended to turn any effort directed against him into an occasion for inflicting injury upon the Philistines. Betrayed by Delilah. It was after this that Samson fell in love with Delilah. See Delilah. For material gain she sought to learn the secret of Samson's strength. 3 times he gave her misleading answers. But, because of her persistent pestering, he finally gave in and revealed to her that his strength lay in his being a Nazirite from birth. She then got in touch with the Philistines to get a reward for turning him over to them. While Samson was sleeping on her knees, Delilah had his hair shaved off. Upon awakening, he no longer had Jehovah's spirit, for he had allowed himself to get into a position that led to the termination of his Naziriteship. Not the hair itself, but what it stood for, that is, Samson's special relationship with Jehovah as a Nazirite, was the source of his strength. With the end of that relationship, Samson was no different from any other man. Therefore, the Philistines were able to blind him, bind him with copper fetters, and put him to work as a grinder in the prison house. JG 16. 4-21. While Samson languished in prison, the Philistines arranged for a great sacrifice to their god Dagon, to whom they attributed their success in having captured Samson. Great throngs, including all the Axis lords, were assembled in the house used for Dagon worship. On the roof alone there were 3,000 men and women. The merry Philistines had Samson, whose hair had meanwhile grown luxuriantly, brought out of prison to provide amusement for them. Upon his arrival, Samson asked the boy who was leading him to let him feel the pillars that supported the structure. He then prayed to Jehovah. "Remember me, please, and O textui acute miritra longo." Samuel 851:28, 33-38. Samuel came to have 3 full brothers and 2 full sisters. 1-2. 21. Promised to the service of Jehovah as a Nazirite by his mother Hannah before conception. 1-1. 11. Samuel was taken to the tabernacle at Shiloh upon being weaned, perhaps at the age of at least 3 years. Compare 2 ch 31. 16. And was left there in the charge of high priest Eli. 1-1. 24-28. Thus Samuel, having a linen ephod girded on, ministered to Jehovah as a boy. Annually his mother visited him and brought him a new sleeveless coat. 1-2. 18, 19. As he grew, Samuel became more likable both from Jehovah's standpoint and from that of man. 1-2. 26. Becomes prophet at an early age. At night Samuel slept in the temple of Jehovah, where the ark of God was, and his first assignment in the morning appears to have been to open the doors of Jehovah's house. 1-3. 3, 15 Evidently the words where the Ark of God was applied to the tabernacle area and are not to be understood as signifying that Samuel slept in the most holy. As a non-priestly Kohathite Levite he was not entitled to see the Ark or any of the other sacred furnishings inside the sanctuary. New 4. 17-20 The only part of the house of Jehovah to which Samuel had access was the tabernacle courtyard. Therefore, he must have opened the doors leading into the courtyard, and it must have been there that he slept. During the period that the tabernacle was permanently located at Shiloh, various structures were likely erected, and one of these could have served as Samuel's sleeping place. One night, after having retired, Samuel heard a voice calling him by name. Imagining the speaker to be High Priest Eli, he ran to see him. After this occurred 3 times, Eli discerned that Jehovah was calling Samuel and Eli instructed him accordingly. Jehovah then made known to Samuel his judgment against Eli's house. Fearful, Samuel did not volunteer any information concerning the word of Jehovah until requested to do so by Eli. Thus began Samuel's prophetic work, and all Israel eventually became aware that he was indeed Jehovah's prophet. 1-3. 2-21. Leads Israel in true worship. Over 20 years later, at Samuel's exhortation, the Israelites abandoned idolatrous worship and began serving Jehovah alone. Subsequently, Samuel had the Israelites assemble at Mizpah. Taking advantage of the situation, the Philistines invaded. Becoming fearful, the sons of Israel requested that Samuel call to Jehovah for aid. He did so and also offered up a sucking lamb in sacrifice. 1-7. 2-9 Of course, as a non-priestly Kohathite Levite, Samuel was not authorized to officiate at the sanctuary altar. New 18. 2, 3, 6, 7, and there is no record that he ever did so. However, as Jehovah's representative and prophet, he could sacrifice at other places in compliance with divine direction, as did Gideon. JG 6. 25-28 and Elijah. 1 Kai 18. 36-38 Jehovah answered Samuel's prayer, throwing the Philistines into confusion and thereby enabling the Israelites to gain a decisive victory. To commemorate this, Samuel set up a stone between Mizpah and Jeshanah and called it Ebenezer, meaning stone of help. 1-7. 10-12 Doubtless from the spoils of this and other wars, Samuel set aside things as holy to maintain the tabernacle. 1 Ch 26. 27, 28. The days of Samuel brought additional reverses for the Philistines. 1-7. 13, 14 and proved to be a period marked by outstanding Passover celebrations. 2 Ch 35. 18 Samuel also seems to have worked out some arrangement for the Levite gatekeepers, and his arrangement may have served as a basis for the organization put into operation by David. 1 Ch 9. 22 From his home at Ramah in the mountainous region of Ephraim, Samuel annually made a circuit of Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, judging Israel at all these places. 1-7. 15-17 Never did he abuse his position. His record was without blame. 1-12. 2-5 But his sons, Joel and Otextoi acute miritra longo. Samuel 852 Samuel reviewed his own record, as well as Israel's past history, and showed that obedience to Jehovah by the king and the people was needed to maintain divine approval. To impress upon them the seriousness of having rejected Jehovah as king, Samuel prayed for an unseasonal thunderstorm. Jehovah's answering that petition motivated the people to acknowledge their serious transgression. 1-11. 14. 12. 25. On 2 occasions thereafter Samuel had to censure Saul for disobedience to divine direction. In the first instance, Samuel announced that Saul's kingship would not last, because he had presumptuously gone ahead in making a sacrifice instead of waiting as he had been commanded. 1-13. 10-14 Rejection by Jehovah of Saul himself as king was the second condemnatory message that Samuel delivered to Saul for disobediently pre-record of the beginning of kingship in Israel, emphasizing obedience to Jehovah, written by Samuel, Nathan, and Gad. 1 Samuel covers the time from the birth of Samuel to the death of Israel's first king, Saul. Jehovah raises up Samuel as prophet in Israel. 1. 7. 17 Samuel is born as an answer to his mother Hannah's prayer. After he is weaned, He is presented for sanctuary service in fulfillment of Hannah's vow. Jehovah speaks to Samuel, pronouncing judgment against Eli's house, because his sons Hophni and Phinehas act wickedly and Eli does not rebuke them. As Samuel grows up, he is recognized as Jehovah's prophet. Jehovah's word against Eli begins to be fulfilled. Philistines capture the ark and slay Eli's sons. Eli dies on hearing the news. Years later, Samuel urges the Israelites to abandon idolatry and serve Jehovah alone. Jehovah gives them victory over the Philistines. Saul becomes Israel's first king. 1:15. 35. The Israelite elders approach aged Samuel, requesting a human king. Jehovah tells him to listen to their voice. Jehovah directs Samuel to anoint Saul, a Benjaminite, as king. Samuel presents Saul to an assembly of Israelites at Mizpah. Not everyone accepts him. Saul defeats the Ammonites. His kingship is reconfirmed at Gilgal. Samuel admonishes the people to remain obedient to Jehovah. Faced with Philistine aggression, Saul fails to obey Jehovah and wait for Samuel's arrival, offering sacrifices himself. Samuel tells him that because of this his kingdom will not last. Saul defeats the Amalekites, but he disobediently preserves alive King Agag and the best of the animals. Samuel tells Saul he is rejected by Jehovah as king and that obedience is more important than sacrifice. David comes to prominence, and this angers Saul. 16. 1:20. 42. Samuel anoints David, and Jehovah's spirit leaves Saul. David becomes a harpist for Saul to soothe him when disturbed. David kills the Philistine champion Goliath, and a deep friendship develops between David and Saul's son Jonathan. Placed over Saul's warriors, David gains repeated victories and is celebrated in song more than Saul. Saul becomes jealous. Twice Saul's attempts to kill David fail, as does his scheme to have David die at the hands of the Philistines while procuring the bride price for Saul's daughter Michal. Despite his promise to Jonathan, Saul for a third time tries to kill David, and David flees to Samuel at Ramah. Jonathan unsuccessfully tries to intercede for David with his father. He warns David, and he and David make a covenant. David's life as a fugitive. 21. 1:27. 12. At Nob, high priest Ahimelech gives David food and Goliath's sword. David then flees to Gath, where he escapes harm by acting insane. He takes refuge in the cave of Adullam and then in the forest of Hereth. Saul has Ahimelech and everyone in Nob killed. Ahimelech's son Abithar survives and comes to David. David saves Keilah from Philistines, but afterward he leaves the city to avoid being surrendered to Saul. Neotextoi acute miritra longo. Samuel, books of 853. Serving alive King Agag and the best of the Amalekite flock and herd. In response to Saul's plea, Samuel appeared with him before the older men of Israel and the people. After that Samuel commanded that Agag be brought to him. On then went hacking him to pieces before Jehovah in Gilgal. 1:15. 10-33. Anoints David. When the two men parted, they had no further association. Samuel, however, went into mourning for Saul. But Jehovah God interrupted his mourning, commissioning him to go to Bethlehem to anoint one of the sons of Jesse as Israel's future king. To avoid any suspicion on Saul's part that might result in Samuel's death, Jehovah directed that Samuel take along a cow for sacrifice. Perhaps fearing that Samuel had come to reprove or punish some wrongdoing, the older men of Bethlehem trembled. But he assured them that his coming meant peace and then arranged for Jesse and his sons to share in a sacrificial meal. Impressed by the appearance of Jesse's firstborn Eliab, Samuel reasoned that this son must surely be Jehovah's choice for the kingship. But neither Eliab nor any of the other 6 sons of Jesse present had been chosen by Jehovah. Therefore, at Samuel's insistence, the youngest son, David, was called from pasturing the sheep, and then at Jehovah's direction Samuel anointed David in the midst of his brothers. 1:15. 34. 16. 13. Later, after King Saul had made several attempts on his life, David fled to Samuel at Ramah. The two men then went to Naioth, and David remained there until Saul personally came to look for him. 1:19. 18. 20. 1. During the time David was still under restriction because of Saul, Samuel died. And all Israel proceeded to collect together and bewail him and bury him at his house in Ramah. 1:25. 1. Thus Samuel died as an approved servant of Jehovah God after a lifetime of faithful service. PS 99. 6. J 15. 1. Heb 11. 32 He had demonstrated persistence in fulfilling his commission 1 to 16. 6. 11. Devotion to true worship 1 to 7. 3-6. Honesty in his dealings 1 to 12. 3. Encourage and firmness in announcing and upholding Jehovah's judgments and decisions 1 to 10. 24. 13. 13. 15. 32, 33. Regarding the account of Saul's request for the spirit medium at Endor to bring up Samuel for him, see Saul number 1. Samuel, books of. 2 books of the Hebrew scriptures that apparently were not divided in the original Hebrew canon. Indicative of this is a note in the Masorah showing that words in 1 Samuel, chapter 28 one of the concluding chapters of 1 Samuel, were in the middle of the book. Writers and time covered. Ancient Jewish tradition credits Samuel with the writership of the first part of the book, and Nathan and Gad with the remaining portion. That these 3 prophets did write is confirmed at 1 Chronicles 29. 29. The book itself reports. Samuel spoke to the people about the rightful due of the kingship and wrote it in a book and deposited it before Jehovah. 1 to 10. 25 However, on the basis of 1 Samuel 27. 6. Where there is reference to the kings of Judah, numerous scholars place the final compiling of the books of Samuel sometime after the 10-tribe kingdom of Israel came into existence. If the expression the kings of Judah denotes only Judean kings of the 2-tribe kingdom, this would show that the writings of Samuel, Nathan, and Gad must have been put into final form by someone else. On the other hand, if the kings of Judah simply means kings from the tribe of Judah, these words could have been recorded by Nathan, since he lived under the rulership of 2 Judean kings, David and Solomon. 1 Chi 32-34. 2 Ch 9. 29. The fact that Hannah and an unnamed man of God used the expressions king and anointed one years before a king actually ruled over Israel does not support the argument of some that these passages date from a period later than indicated in the book. 1 to 2. 10. 35 The idea of a futuro textoi acute miritra longo, Samuel, books of 854 Mount 12. 1-4 In the synagogue of Antioch in Pisidia, the Apostle Paul quoted from 1 Samuel 13. 14 as he briefly reviewed events from Israel's history. Act 13. 20-22 This apostle, in his letter to the Romans, used words from David's Psalm, which passage is found at both 2 Samuel 22. 50 and Psalm 18. 49, to prove that Christ's ministry to the Jews verified God's promises and gave a basis for non-Jews to glorify God for his mercy. Row 15. 8, 9 Jehovah's words to David at 2 Samuel 7. 14 are quoted and applied to Christ Jesus at Hebrews 1. 5. Outstanding, 2, is the candor of the record. It exposes the wrongs of the priestly house of Eli 1 to 2. 12-17, 22-25, the corruption of Samuel's sons 1 to 8. 1-3, and the sins and family difficulties of King David 2 to 11. 2-15. 13. 1-22. 15. 13, 14. 24. 10. Another evidence of the authenticity of the account is the fulfillment of prophecies. These relate to Israel's request for a king to 17. 14. 1 to 8. 5. Jehovah's rejection of Eli's house 1 to 2. 31. 3. 12-14. 1 Chi 2. 27, and the continuance of the kingship in David's line 2 to 7. 16. J 33. 17. As 21. 25-27. Mount 1. 1. Lu 1. 32, 33. The record is in complete harmony with the rest of the scriptures. This is especially noticeable when examining the Psalms, many of which are illuminated by what is contained in the books of Samuel. King Saul's sending messengers to watch David's house in order to kill him provides the background for Psalm 59. 1 to 19. 11 David's experiences at Gath, where he disguised his sanity to escape death, are alluded to in Psalms 34 and 56. 1-21. 10-15. Evidently the name Abimelech record of David's kingship. The blessings he experienced, as well as the discipline he received when he sinned, originally part of one scroll with 1 Samuel. The portion in 2 Samuel was completed by Gad and Nathan by the end of David's life in about 1040 BCE. David becomes king and rules from Hebron. 1. 4. 12. David mourns the death of Saul and Jonathan. He takes up residence at Hebron and is anointed king by the men of Judah. Abner makes Saul's son Ishbosheth king over the rest of Israel. Fighting breaks out between the rival kingdoms. Abner defects to David, but is killed by Joab. Ishbosheth is murdered. David orders the execution of the assassins. David rules as king over all the tribes of Israel. 5. 1. 10. 19. David is anointed as king over all Israel. He captures the stronghold of Zion and makes Jerusalem his capital city. The Philistines invade twice but are defeated each time David attempts to bring the ark to Jerusalem. The attempt is abandoned when Uzzah dies trying to steady it from falling. His second attempt succeeds when the ark is transported in the proper way. David expresses to Nathan his desire to build a temple for Jehovah. Jehovah concludes a covenant with him for a kingdom. David sins with Bathsheba. Calamity comes on him out of his own house. 11. 1. 20. 26. The Israelites go to war against Ammon. David commits adultery with Bathsheba, whose husband Uriah is serving in the army. When efforts to conceal his sin fail, David arranges for Uriah to die in battle and marries the widowed Bathsheba. With skillful use of an illustration, Nathan reproves David for his sin and announces Jehovah's judgment. Calamity will come out of his own house, his own wives will be violated, the son from Bathsheba will die, the child dies. Bathsheba, pregnant again, gives birth to Solomon. David's son Amnon rapes his half-sister Tamar. David's son Absalom, Tamar's full brother, avenges her by having Amnon killed. Then he flees to Jeshurun. Absalom, having gained David's full pardon, starts scheming against his father. Finally he is himself proclaimed king at Hebron. David and his supporters flee Jerusalem to escape from Absalom and his partisans. In Jerusalem, Absalom has a text to acute muritra longo. Sanballat 855. Appearing in the superscription of Psalm 34 is to be viewed as a title for King Achish. Psalm 142 may reflect David's thoughts while hiding from Saul in the cave of Adullam. 1-22. 1 or in the cave in the wilderness of Engedi. 1-24. 1-3. This is perhaps also the case with Psalm 57. However, a comparison of Psalm 57 6 with 1 Samuel 24 2-4 seems to favor the cave in the wilderness of Engedi, for there Saul, as it were, fell into the pit he had excavated for David. Psalm 52 pertains to Doeg's informing Saul about David's dealings with Ahimelech. 1-22. 9-10. The action of the Ziphites in revealing David's whereabouts to King Saul furnished the basis for Psalm 54. 1-23. 19. Psalm 2 seems to allude to the attempts made by the Philistines to unseat David as king after his capture of the stronghold of Zion. 2-5. 17-25. Trouble with the Edomites during the war with Hadadezer is the setting for Psalm 60. 2-8. 3-13. 14. Psalm 51 is a prayer of David, beseeching forgiveness for his sin with Bathsheba. 2-11. 2-15. 12. 1-14. David's flight from Absalom provides the basis for Psalm 3. 2-15. 12-17. 30. Possibly Psalm 7 finds its historical setting in Shimei's cursing David. 2-16. 5-8. Psalm the 30th of may allude to events in connection with David's erection of an altar on the threshing floor of Araunah. 2-24. 15-25. Psalm 18 parallels 2 Samuel 22 and pertains to Jehovah's delivering David from Saul and other enemies. Sections missing in the Greek Septuagint. 1 Samuel 17. 12-31, 55. 18. 6a does not appear in the Greek Septuagint as contained in Vatican manuscript No. 1209. Numerous scholars have, therefore, concluded that the omissions are later additions to the Hebrew text. Arguing against this view, C.F. Keel and F. Delitzsch comment. The notion that the sections in question are interpolations that have crept into the text, cannot be sustained on the mere authority of the Septuagint version. Since the arbitrary manner in which the translators of this version made omissions or additions at pleasure is obvious to anyone. Commentary on the Old Testament, 1973, Volume 2, 1 Samuel, p. 177, ftn. If it could be definitely established that actual discrepancies exist between the omitted sections and the rest of the book, the authenticity of 1 Samuel 17. 12-31, 55. 18. 6a would reasonably be in question. A comparison of 1 Samuel 16. 18-23 and 1 Samuel 17. 55-58 reveals what appears to be a contradiction, for in the latter passage Saul is depicted as asking about the identity of his own court musician and armor-bearer, David. However, it should be noted that David's earlier being described as a valiant, mighty man and a man of war could have been based on his courageous acts in single-handedly killing a lion and a bear to rescue his father's sheep. 1 Samuel 16. 18. 17. 34-36 Also, the scriptures do not state that David actually served in battle as Saul's armor-bearer before he killed Goliath. Saul's request to Jesse was, "Let David, please, keep attending upon me, for he has found favor in my eyes." 1 Samuel 16. 22 This request does not preclude the possibility that Saul later permitted David to return to Bethlehem so that, when war broke out with the Philistines, David was then shepherding his father's flock. Regarding Saul's question, whose son is the boy, Abner? The aforementioned commentary observes p. 178, ftn. Even if Abner had not troubled himself about the lineage of Saul's harpist, Saul himself could not well have forgotten that David was a son of the Bethlehemite Jesse. But there was much more implied in Saul's question. It was not the name of David's father alone that he wanted to discover, but what kind of man the father of a youth who possessed the courage to accomplish so marvelous a heroic deed really was. And the question was put not merely in order that he might grant him an exemption of his house from taxes as the reward promised for the conquest o textui acute miritra longo, sanctification 856 against the king of Persia. Ne 2. 19. 4. 1 As the repair work progressed, he and other opposers conspired to fight against Jerusalem. But whatever efforts they made in this regard were ineffective, for the Jews relied on Jehovah and kept a guard posted. Ne 4. 7-9 After the gaps in the wall of Jerusalem were filled, Sanballat and others repeatedly tried to lure Nehemiah away from the city. When this failed, he and Tobiah hired a Jew to frighten Nehemiah into wrongfully hiding in the temple. But they did not succeed. Ne 6. 1-14. Later, upon his return after an absence from Jerusalem, Nehemiah found that a grandson of high priest Eliashib had become a son-in-law of Sanballat. Nehemiah therefore chased this grandson away. Ne 13. 6, 7, 28. Sanctification. The act or process of making holy, separating, or setting apart for the service or use of Jehovah God. The state of being holy, sanctified, or purified. Sanctification draws attention to the action whereby holiness is produced, made manifest, or maintained. See holiness. Words drawn from the Hebrew verb kadash and words related to the Greek adjective hagi also rendered holy, sanctified, made sacred, and set apart. A better understanding of the subject can be gained by consideration of the usage of the words in the original languages. They are applied in the scriptures to 1 Jehovah God, 2 Jesus Christ, 3 angels, 4 men and animals, 5 things, 6 periods of time or occasions, and 7 land possessions. Sometimes the Hebrew word for sanctify was used in the sense of preparing or making oneself ready or in fit condition. Jehovah commanded Moses to say to the complaining Israelites, "Sanctify yourselves for tomorrow, as you will certainly eat meat." New 11. 18 Before Israel crossed the Jordan River, Joshua ordered, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow Jehovah will do wonderful things in your midst." Jos 3. 5 In all cases the term has a religious, spiritual, and moral sense. It can denote the getting away from anything that displeases Jehovah or appears bad in his eyes, including physical uncleanness. God said to Moses, "Go to the people, and you must sanctify them today and tomorrow, and they must wash their mantles. Because on the third day Jehovah will come down before the eyes of all the people upon Mount Sinai." Acts 19. 10, 11. The word is used to mean purifying or cleansing, as at 2 Samuel 11. 4, which reads, "She was sanctifying herself from her uncleanness." Jehovah told Israel that they should be separate from the nations of the world and clean from their practices. He gave Israel laws to keep them set apart, including the laws defining what was clean and what was unclean for eating. Then he gave them the reason. "For I am Jehovah your God. And you must sanctify yourselves and you must prove yourselves holy, because I am holy." Lunar 11. 44. Jehovah God. Jehovah God is holy and absolutely clean. As the Creator and universal sovereign, he has the right to the exclusive worship of all of his creatures. Therefore he says that he will demonstrate his holiness, acting to sanctify himself and his name before the eyes of all creation. "I shall certainly magnify myself and sanctify myself and make myself known before the eyes of many nations. And they will have to know that I am Jehovah." S 38. 23. Those who desire his favor and life must sanctify him and his name, that is, they must hold that name in its proper place as separate from and higher than all others. 22. 32. Isa 8. 13. 29. 23. Jesus taught his followers to pray as the foremost thing. "Our Father in the heavens, let your name be sanctified or, be held sacred. Be treated as holy." Mount 6. 9, FTN. Jesus Christ. Jehovah God selected his only begotten Son and sent him to earth to do a special work in behalf of God's name and to give his life as a ransom for humankind. But he was not received and respected by the Jewish Otextoi Acute Muritra Longo. Sanctification 857 Angels. The angels of God are called by Jesus holy angels, sanctified, set apart for Jehovah's holy use. Mr. 8. 38. Lu 9. 26. Compare PS 103. 20. They appear in the sacred presence of Jehovah, beholding his face. Mount 18. 10. Lu 1. 19. Men and animals. In times past God has chosen certain persons whom he desired to use for his exclusive service, and he sanctified them. When he determined to use the males of the tribe of Levi to take care of the sacred tabernacle and its services, he said to Moses, "As for me, look, I do take the Levites from among the sons of Israel in place of all the firstborn opening the womb of the sons of Israel. And the Levites must become mine. For every firstborn is mine. In the day that I struck every firstborn in the land of Egypt I sanctified to myself every firstborn in Israel from man to beast. They should become mine. I am Jehovah." In order to release the firstborn of the other 11 tribes, the Israelites were required to give in exchange all the males of the tribe of Levi. Then they had to give 5 shekels $11 to the sanctuary for every male firstborn above the total number of male Levites. This released the firstborn ones from being set apart for Jehovah's exclusive service. New 3. 12, 13, 46-48. After this, all male firstborn ones opening the womb were considered to be sanctified, but were presented at the temple and redeemed by a payment of 5 shekels $11. Acts 13. 2. La 12. 1-4. New 18. 15, 16. Those under Nazirite vows were sanctified for the period of their vow. New 6. 1-8. The firstborn of domestic animals were also sanctified, to be sacrificed or, in some cases, to be redeemed. The 15. 19. See firstborn, firstling. The priesthood. Jehovah also purposed to set aside an exclusive family within the tribe of Levi to serve as his priests of sacrifice, namely, Aaron and his sons and their male descendants. Acts 28. 1-3, 41. They were then sanctified with fitting sacrifices in a symbolic series of acts described in Exodus chapter 29. Jehovah's everlasting high priest, Jesus Christ, and his fellow priests, are under priests, namely those who follow Christ's footsteps and whom God anoints to be members of Christ's body, are also sanctified.